Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. So, one like equals one prayer. Retweet to support this cause. Boycott Modern Warfare 2. Prothean Day 1 DLC. Boycott Mass Effect 3. We all know how those things turned out, and Epic Games know that too. Large public backlashes are an extremely interesting beast within gaming. Now, this video is not to invalidate anyone's opinion, nor is it to erase the decisions made by principled individuals who have actually stuck by their guns and held to boycotts. Indeed, you'll find that the inevitability of defeat often has less to do with the people who are involved with the boycott and more to do with the sheer number of people that we're dealing with and the fundamental mathematics behind it all. So boycotts are a rather mixed thing. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, and especially with media products, they have a strange relationship where ultimately the boycotted item fills a particularly high value space within the potential customer's life, i.e. it's after work, maybe when the kids are in bed and you finally get 1 hour free. I mean, I don't have kids, so I don't know about that, but I think that's about right. So while, principles and all that might be good, everyone's fighting a dozen battles in their real life. And history tells us that boycotting media products, well, that's one of the first fights to be abandoned. And it all begs the question, what are we to do when our best efforts are met with failure? As somebody who years has advocated for a different path for World of Warcraft, this has been on my mind, especially since the majority of the game's engaged player base seems to have had a position similar to my own and that of other content creators for the game. I suppose for them, the people who are kind of shaping the game's culture. Now, for the broad audience, well, Epic Games has brought this age-old problem back into focus. Phoenix Point signed Epic Games exclusivity, literally going against the platform they crowdfunded upon. The backlash was massive, far larger than the game itself. Yet a day after the news broke, only 3% of pre-purchasers had refunded. Additionally, Phoenix Point became far more known to far more people. Being a niche title for a specific audience, fans of course of the original XCOM, well, it hardly had the most broad coverage ever, yet its Epic Store drama led to millions of views. Sure, those views were not praising the game, but ultimately, if a game is good enough, as that one appears to be, then people will tend to go for it. And being realistic, I actually imagine this controversy may have led to a bump in sales and might overall have them coming out ahead, because more people simply will be aware of the title's existence. Even if that 3% turned into a 10%, which is kind of unlikely, well, they'd still be financially ahead, based only on the Epic Store's 88% split, and that's not even taking into account the large cash advance that they received, likely being well over $1 million, being enough to fund a year of DLC from the company, give it away to backers for free, and to be enough to allow them to refund all crowdfunding and still be financially ahead. Yet, Metro Exodus was the first major story here, with its impending release and prior pre-order availability in Steam making it a particularly egregious case. Well, the game has since released, and Epic revealed its sales performance during GDC. Metro Exodus sold 2.5x its predecessor, Metro Last Light, and that is digital to digital like for Last Light to Exodus. 2.5 times is a lot more games, and it's larger than the retail sales increase that was 1.5 times. However, times very much have changed. While it's not an online game and would not see such a steep drop-off in retail like, say, what Anthem or The Division would, well, we all know that retail is slowly fading out. Exodus was certainly, though, a better-selling game overall, benefiting from a larger PC audience, as often happens near the end of a console lifecycle, and a greater marketing push from its publisher. Additionally, the franchise was not dormant in the interim period, with the remastered collection of it actually managing to outsell Metro Last Light in a few territories. There's no doubt that its 1.5 million sales over its first half year indicate increased interest in the franchise, especially since that two-game collection would have got people fully up to speed with the franchise ready for Metro Exodus. And that leaves us in a strange position as far as the numbers go. Yes, Exodus did sell significantly better digitally. Yes, it had a large increase over its predecessor digitally, where of course this time it wasn't exclusive, but it's also true that those retail comparisons really don't make as much sense these days. Sadly, we don't know the Metro Last Light sales numbers, but we can safely say that regardless of store, Exodus sold very well indeed, but that sales matter a lot less than revenue, And that's why we need to take a look at the revenue situation. Exodus sold in the Epic Store for $60. Of that 60, the publisher would receive 88%, so 52.8. If that were Steam, with 30% as its cut, then each sale by default would generate 42. Now, if you sold 500k copies, that would equal $26.5 million for the company on Epic. With Steam, well, the picture is a little bit different due to the tiered system. It's actually a bit like marginal tax brackets, where sales under 10 million get taxed 30%, sales between 10 and 50 million get taxed 25%, and sales above 50 million get taxed 20%. So 500k sales, total revenue 30 million. The first 10 of that 30 is taxed at 30%, so the publisher gets 7 million. The next 20 million of that revenue is taxed at 25%, so the publisher gets 15 million. Add those together, and 500k sales earns the publisher 22 million in Steam, which, as you can see, is 4.5 million less than what it would earn them on Epic. So for Steam to make as much as Epic, taking the split into account, the game would have to sell another 93,750 copies. And that highlights the core point here. Are 93,750 people going to boycott the game? Well, you know, there was millions of views on the topic on YouTube, but how many unique viewers? Well, considering how the algorithm tunnels its recommendations essentially based on what you're interested in, and the stats that I have access to about, unique viewers and stuff, it's far fewer people than views. Maybe 1 million people. Now, of that million, how many of them were actually interested in Metro? Given how most of the gaming news scene grew off consumer backlash to multiplayer-focused titles like Battlefront 2, I doubt that Exodus was a massive game for that group and that they weren't probably paying attention to it. So even if 10% of that 1 million was actually interested in Metro, which seems like a stretch, that's only 100,000 viewers. And of that 100,000, how many would be willing to boycott? Now, I understand these numbers are just pulled out of thin air, but I'm fairly confident they're within the right order of magnitude at least. But for our example, well, almost all of those people would have to join the boycott, and I think that's pretty unlikely. Now, sure, they're just fun numbers, and sure, comment sections are full of people saying they are boycotting, but you've got to remember, comments usually represent less than 2% of a video's viewership, and comments skew massively negative because negative emotion is far more likely to prompt a human to action than positive emotion, even of equal magnitude. So massive views likely is not going to lead to massive action against the title, though it absolutely has led to some. Guess what it also did? It put a massive spotlight on this game. People knew that it existed. It got more than most marketing campaigns could have hoped for. I'd hazard to guess a large portion of people who did not know about this game but were watching the news found out about it. So while the story was not negative, certainly wasn't positive, it was known to people. And what happened next? Well, the game released to strong reviews, an 83 score on OpenCritic with 84% of critics recommending it. While it may not have been for the best reasons, many of the people who were following the story of this game, then found out, oh, it's actually quite fantastic. I would imagine that this overall will have led to more sales than if the whole debacle did not happen, and the game was just another quiet release in Q1 2019. Additionally, this game did not release in a vacuum, especially for the audience who are watching gaming news and reaction channels and reading gaming news websites. This was peak Anthem drama time, with its release schedule being ripped apart as well as its microtransactions, with players and pundits essentially rebelling against many modern industry practices. That's the perfect environment for an audience to be interested in a top-quality single-player game that owes a lot to Half-Life 2 and has none of that rubbish. Yet there's another aspect for the publisher though. You see, initial sales are not everything. They're a lot, but they're not everything. They just ensure that all of their high-ticket, full RRP launch sales are happening on the store with the highest rev share. 1 year later, it's going to go on Steam, and sure, it'll be discounted by a bit, but at that point, many of the people who have boycotted the Epic Store will probably pick the game up. So when we take the long-term view from the publisher's perspective, they got excellent launch sales, but they did not do that by discounting their game or really doing anything that cannibalizes future sales. They got those sales at full price with the highest rev share in the business, and they can sell to the stragglers later on down the line. And that's kind of the point of this video, and it's a hard thing for all of us to face down. Gaming activism is of limited use, especially since these are things made for leisure time when people typically are not caring about the outside world. of all boycotts, on a population scale, ones like this are inherently going to be a bit less effective. Additionally, while gaming on YouTube is large, it's not the entire gaming audience. Now at this point, we're probably all thinking, Fallout 76, it did not do well from the backlash. Something that I think is also supported by the sales events that Bethesda and retailers had to run to shift copies of that game. Well, here's what I think about that. I think that gaming activism can help bury a bad game. You know, spread the word that, hey, your limited leisure time should not be used on this game. That's a powerful and resonant message. Now, if the message is basically saying, hey, this game is caught up with serious business model issues, but it's actually a fantastic game, well, most people just care about if the game is enjoyable to play. So even a message like that, I suspect, will have a net positive effect on game sales. And this is not like Shadow of War, where that was basically people saying, hey, this could have been a great game, but its business model literally ruined the core pillar of its design. So for core games, this is why I believe the consumer boycotts are not universally effective. It really does depend on the game. And as for the other struggles, like say microtransactions in general and mobile games, I think it's a mix of both, but with mobile, it simply, I believe, is the case that even if everybody who watches this video and everyone who watches this channel and every other gaming news channel all opted out of those games, it wouldn't make a lick of difference. We're sadly just dwarfed by the scale of mobile. So what's the key takeaway here? Well, basically, Epic called this, the numbers have proved them right. Now sure, they do plan to use exclusives as a tool for leverage less over time, and they said they never want to repeat the Metro situation where ultimately it was very close to launch, but they made their bet, and they ended up being right by the numbers. Now this does not mean we should stop, it does not mean we should lighten criticism. This video more exists to be a reality check. It's meant to lay out how the dominoes are falling, a sort of debrief to the whole situation. Ultimately, Epic's exclusivity is really annoying. I mean, fundamentally, it's just a big pain, and for that reason it does kind of suck. But the thing is, these guys have crunched the numbers, and they have came to the conclusion that PR stuff aside, as long as they break people down and actually get people onto that platform, that future use of that platform is going to be less of a problem for those people because they've already caved once, and they're more willing to come back afterwards. Yeah, they've crunched the numbers, they've taken that bet, and it seems to be working out. I'm not really sure what we can do against that, what we can do to stop that. Certainly, not supporting it is really the only thing that we can do. But I guess it just is interesting that even when we try to do that, it may not all be enough to have the intended effect that we want. So it's an interesting situation. It's hardly a happy, rosy way to end this video. It's hardly a big, rousing call to action that's going to leave me feeling good and you feeling good. It's not rallying the troops, saying that there's a battle out there that we can win. It's actually saying, hey, I mean, all this stuff is fine that we're saying, but actually when you crunch the numbers, oh dear, it's a bit, it's not as simple as just stopping the bad guy. In this case, you know, the bad guy. Let me know what you think about this situation. Let me know what you think about consumer boycotts in general and this whole Epic Store situation. Hopefully they stick to their word and get off the exclusive soon, and maybe at that point, you know, we see Steam default to an 80% or something like that. That's kind of what I'd like to see anyway, but let me know what you think. Thank you very much for watching this video, and be sure to check out the Sekiro sort of review/impressions video that went up today. It's a really cool game. Anyway, cheers, I'll see you next time.